The Edmonton Oilers pulled off their best win of the season Monday night against the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, our attention turns to the impending return of Zach Hyman and where the Oilers go from here.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my 10th season doing digital hockey content, my third as a host here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And I want to welcome everyone to Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in North America. And thank you so much to everyone who is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every single day. And on today's show, we are going to be addressing the direction of the Edmonton Oilers through three very specific lenses: what we know, what we don't know, and what we need to find out. We're going to start with what we know, what we've established, and what we have an understanding of. In our second segment, we will pivot to some open-ended questions that we don't have enough evidence or proof to have an opinion of one way or the other. And then in our final segment, we'll address what we need to figure out about this team going forward. So, to start out with what we know definitively, Connor McDavid is going to do what he can. And that is not a particularly high bar. But when you have one of these all-world caliber players, and McDavid, I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but real quick, McDavid has been the best player. But McDavid has been the best player in the world for much of the last decade at this point. And he probably became the best player in the world somewhere around 2018, definitively, like unambiguously better than Sidney Crosby was at that point. And ever since, he has been carrying that banner as the great Canadian hockey player, the face of a franchise, somebody who has the capacity to alter the direction of the entire league with the decisions he makes. And through the first 2 or 3 weeks of this season, I would say there was a reasonable amount of conjecture that he was off to a slow start. He was not putting the puck in the net to the same degree he had historically. And I know McDavid doesn't have a crazy reputation as being a goal scorer. He's more of a distributor or playmaker, somebody who makes offense happen for everyone else. This is a player who averages 41 goals a season for his career. So for him to be under 40 last year, that was a real red flag and a real question mark, asking the simple question: are we watching Connor evolve and change what he is to adapt to both how he physically feels, what he thinks he's still good at, and maybe where the game is going to some degree? And it's one of the great features or components of the all-time great players, because they are capable of having two, sometimes even three different types of careers. You look at Sidney Crosby, who came into the NHL as an explosive, dynamic skater, somebody who could dangle you out of the rink, create off the rush, and he pivoted as he lost a little bit of that foot speed, as he became more conscientious of trying to avoid contact whenever he can because of the injuries, the concussion issues. He became a bit more of a cerebral player. And now you are watching this third stage of Sidney Crosby's career, where he is an incredible grinder of a player. And it's a bit of a misnomer to call Sidney Crosby a grinder, because he doesn't fall into that traditional toolbox. But you watch Sidney Crosby in the corners, along the boards, at the net front, using his body to create space, using his body to create leverage. That is a very unique skill set you only have the capacity to do if you still have the physical stressors if you still have the ability to withstand the physical stressors of playing a physical game into the later stages of your career, and lasting long enough to identify, okay, I need to evolve. And there's a question there as to what Connor is going to become in the next phase of his career as that foot speed, that all-world, scintillating, exciting foot speed maybe begins to wane ever so slightly. And no one's accusing Connor of falling off. Anybody who was on him for his regular season last year, I think, missing the forest to the trees for the purposes of maybe having a dialogue, maybe even a bad faith one at that. But so far this year, he's got 24 points in 17 games, 54 shots on goal. So that comes out to a little less than 4 shots on goal per game, 17, 17, 34, 34, 68. So a little bit less than 4, probably about 3.5 shots on goal per game. That's pretty solid. You would like that number probably to be closer to 4, being that he is a career he's shooting 13% on the year. You would like to see him take a bit more of not a leadership in a metaphorical sense, but in a flow of the game. I am a good shooter of the puck. I can afford to take more shots, especially when you think about who he's playing with. He has spent the majority of his 5-on-5 minutes this year with Andrew Mangiapane and with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. At 5-on-5, 55% of the scoring chances, 43% of the shots on goal, 50% of the goals, 46% of the expected goals, 47% of the high danger chances. That's not great. For a McDavid line to be under 50% in a lot of those metrics, that is a massive red flag. That is something that should be setting off alarm bells, asking what's the question. The return of Zach Hyman, which we'll address in our second and third segments, don't you worry, is a part of that. And I do think Hyman returning will help McDavid's 5-on-5 production. And then real quick, McDavid just with Nuge, 56% of the scoring chances, 56% of the shots on goal, 56% of the goals, 57% of the expected goals, 63% of the high danger chances. That's in about a third of the ice time, the two of them without Mangiapane as the three of them all together. And then the other component to this of what we know definitively, the Oilers' style is not suiting their talent. They are playing low event hockey. They are holding teams pretty well defensively. They're 10th in chances against per 60. They're 3rd in shots against per 60. 29th in goals against. Red alert, bad. 16th in expected goals against. Mediocre, but that's passable. And then they're 11th in high danger chances against. So all of those numbers in the aggregate tell you the Oilers are playing okay defense. It's the few big mistakes that are ending up in the back of their net that are fueling this perception. And of course, goaltending is directly married to that, and we are dealing with the ramifications of the Oilers being an .875 save percentage team at even strength right now. That is not tenable for the NHL in 2025. You need to be able to get passable NHL goaltending. And yes, Alex Lyon's off to a good start in Buffalo. There were options out there Stan Bowman could have chosen to pursue as far as upgrading from Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard. But with the goaltending so in the wind, so volatile, and so undependable, it has put more of an onus on the defense to raise its standards. And so far this year, in spite of these pretty solid underlying numbers, this group is leaving something to be desired. They aren't really tilting the ice in the offensive zone. They aren't really helping facilitate additional offense. And it is coming at the expense of defense and offense. And the Oilers clearly have another gear to get to. And speaking of that, we are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And I'm going to tell you why. Even though I am excited that Zach Hyman is coming back, you might not want to count your chickens before they hatch. When I'm hydrated, everything works better. Focus, energy, mood, even my skin. That's why I've been using Drip Drop. It's doctor-developed hydration that keeps me running at full power no matter what my day looks like. Drip Drop isn't your average sports drink. It delivers 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading brands. Using a science-backed formula trusted by medical professionals, firefighters, and over 20% and over 90% of top college and pro teams. I like using Drip Drop as part of my daily routine. I'll mix a packet in the morning before the gym or during that mid-afternoon 3 o'clock slump. I got my pack the other day in the mail, been adding it to my water at the start of the day. As you guys know, I am a gallon at least a gallon of water per day person. I throw that in there for a little bit of extra juice. Hydration is a non-negotiable. Drip Drop helps me feel sharper, calmer, and honestly, just better overall. Right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. One more time, that's dripdrop.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get 20% off your first order. Stock up now for that winter bulk. Keep your mind and body sharp at their best with Drip Drop. Thank you so much to everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. And thank you so much for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So, my friends, the impetus for this show actually stems from a Donald Rumsfeld interview about 20 years ago. Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of State, somebody who had been in the American government in a number of different roles. But he was talking about the Iraq War, and he was describing the known unknown, which are we know things we don't know, but we're aware that we don't know them. The known things we know and we know of them. And then the unknown, where there are factors or variables we're not aware of, so we can't know about them in our consideration of our decision making. And
it is a really interesting way to talk about considerations and variables. And I still don't have a great feel for this Edmonton Oilers team. I'm going to be really candid and really honest with you. We are a month into this season, and it feels that every single game has the capacity to go entirely off the rails. And that's not entirely out of character for this group. We remember October and November of last year. We remember October and November of the year prior. There is something within this group that makes these starts to the season challenging for them. And it is incumbent upon the coaches to impress upon them what this group needs to do to take action, to change the direction, to change the pivot. And I have written down here under what we don't know, which would be the unknown known. What is Zach Hyman going to be? And I asked this question because I like Zach Hyman, the player, a lot. I find his grinding to be underrated. I think his ability to forecheck in particular doesn't get enough shine. This is the guy who was leading the entire playoffs in hits up until the point he got injured in Game 6 against Dallas, who, if he had played in the Stanley Cup final, didn't get injured, would have set the all-time playoff record for hits in a single postseason. That is a notable statistic. That tells you he is on the puck, he is making the other team's life more difficult. And then you throw in the fact he's capable of being a 25 to 50 goal guy, in addition to being a pretty hard-nosed forechecker, being an above-average skater. That's a really exciting toolbox. But something that I know I have been guilty of in the past, and I do think is worth talking about for a second here, when guys are coming off of layoffs like this, and Zach Hyman's a wrist injury, so he can still skate, he can still do cardio. That shouldn't necessarily be as in question as maybe Trent Frederick, who, coming off the serious ankle injury, never really had great mobility in the playoffs, is still struggling to find his footing as an Oiler into this regular season now. But Hyman, conditioning-wise, should be relatively close. And the reporting is he's going to play latest end of the week, but it could be as soon as the next game. With that said, hockey is such a feel sport. It is a read sport. And Chris Pronger talked about this on the show on Monday. So much of hockey comes down to knowing what the guys you're facing like to do and being able to anticipate it, take it away, and react to it. And Zach Hyman, because he hasn't been able to play, he hasn't been able to practice, he didn't have a preseason, his timing is probably going to be a little bit off. His capacity to read plays, to get where he needs to, is going to take a little while to get going. And I am talking about this now because I want to emphasize that we need to give Zach Hyman a little bit of time. As desperately needed as he is on the first line, and we talked about that first line's numbers with Mangiapane, and it pains me to say because I love Mangiapane, the player, he's just not a first line guy, and I don't think he necessarily has the toolbox to play on a first line consistently and make a positive impact. In spots, injury replacement, changing up the look, I think Mangiapane is perfectly fine. But this first line desperately needs a shot in the arm. And dropping Zach Hyman in there, even a 60, 70% of the version of Zach Hyman we got last year, who was only a 25 goal guy, that's going to make a real difference, both at 5-on-5, the power play, which has been fine, which has probably been the strongest point of this team to this point. I do think there is something to be said for the fact that Hyman getting back in here gets everybody a little bit closer to their true role. And before we talk about Kris Knoblauch, who's the other question I have in this second segment, it's framed around that idea. Because guys like Mangiapane have pretty versatile skill sets where they're not bad offensively, they're not bad defensively, they got good positioning, they can forecheck a little bit, they can be gritty a little bit. Coaches feel an inherent sense of comfort with them. They talk about them like Swiss Army knives, like all-terrain vehicles, that they're good in any situation. But that trade-off, that is a legitimate trade-off when you are prioritizing that versatility versus the high-end capacity of some other players. And I won't get too ahead of myself for a question in our final segment, but what is the plan here as far as Ike Howard or Matthew Savoie? Because they are going to get squeezed. One of those guys, more likely than not, is going to get squeezed in really short order. And then the other question I have for this second segment of what we don't know, but we know we don't know it, is Kris Knoblauch going to get a handle on his feel of this team? I have heaped praise upon Kris Knoblauch in each of the last two postseasons for his ability to navigate goalie controversies, his ability to identify which guys need to come in for which series. I think 2 years ago, both in Vancouver and against Dallas, he did a remarkable job of managing which forwards and which defensemen were going in and out depending on the feel, depending on injuries. And so far this year, Kris Knoblauch has yet to really optimize this lineup fully. He has put together combinations of guys he likes, but that's different from the results. And anybody can assemble the roster, the lineup in a way they feel good about, and they can explain the criteria. Hell, Kris Knoblauch hasn't explained the criteria to me, but I can identify what he wants each of these lines to do, and that tells me about his priorities, his processing. And right now, even if Zach Hyman jumps into the lineup later this week, I still don't feel particularly great about where they're at as far as some of their other decisions in terms of who plays with who gets what responsibilities as far as even strength special teams. And then ultimately, and something we're going to talk about in our final segment, what does that mean going forward? Because if Ike Howard, Matthew Savoie are only getting 10, 11 minutes per game, that might help you right now. But the idea in getting those guys, acquiring those players from the organizations they did and putting them in the roles they are, is the Oilers understand they need to get younger, they need to get cheaper, they need to get more explosive. And trading off their long-term returns for short-term gains, it's really an unfortunate way to manage a bench. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I'm going to tell you what we need to find out about this group going forward. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game, or if you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for your shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. We got a little bit of line movement over the last couple of days in the NBA title race. The Thunder, 210 plus 210. The Nuggets and Cavs still both at 7-1. The Knicks, the Rockets, 12-1. The Lakers down at 14-1, with LeBron reportedly going to make a couple G League rehab appearances in the not so distant future, as he plans to return in the not so distant future. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, and everyone who is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. And this final segment are questions I don't have answers for, that I'm going to walk you through my thought process, explain what I'm thinking, but I don't know which way the wind is going to blow ultimately. Number one, will the goaltending position stabilize? Because where the Oilers are at right now is untenable. This is the third straight season goaltending is becoming an outlier problem. The Oilers' team save percentage this year is .862. They are 0.38% off of where league average goaltending is right now. That is non-competitive. A save percentage that low is commiserate with what you would expect if you call up a career AHL goalie. And Calvin Pickard has largely been a backup, a fringe, a European starting goalie, a spot starter. Calvin Pickard cannot get 30 starts this year. And in today's NHL, you likely need your backup to make somewhere in the ballpark of 20 to 30 starts. If the Oilers give Calvin Pickard 25 starts with an .836 save percentage, that is negligence. And as much as Stuart Skinner isn't the guy for the moment, the Oilers have shown no indication that Connor Ingram is imminent. And I know Ingram is working his way back. He didn't play a lot in the last couple of years. He's someone who probably needs a bit more time. Remember what we were saying before about Zach Hyman needing time to ramp up, maybe a bit more in terms of game speed, positioning. Connor Ingram does need to work himself back up physically to getting starts in hockey games as a goalie. Goalie is the most physically taxing position in hockey. And there isn't a silver bullet fix here. The writers, the media people, they can talk about UC Saros. They can talk about Sam Montembaugh, Jacob Dobashev, Charlie Lindgren. Whatever backup or underutilized guy you're thinking of that is stuck behind someone who's better or has a better, more favorable contract situation that makes it more logical to move them, whoever comes to your mind, the Oilers do not have the roster flexibility to go out there and make that happen. The Oilers simply do not have the cap space nor the assets to go out and get whatever goalie you happen to be thinking of that is better. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there aren't guys better, but actually acquiring them is where it becomes an issue. And the goalie market, as we know, is weird. We spent almost the entire summer talking about this because I wanted a new goalie. A lot of you guys out there listening or watching the show wanted a new goalie. And Stan Bowman effectively shrugged and said, we like our guys. And I get that Stuart Skinner has delivered for the Oilers in big spots, both as a rookie when he got thrown into the fire. He won 41 games in the playoffs against Dallas each of the last 2 years. This is somebody who has something in him. But it's really ironic. And you are watching the Oilers in real time say, well, we cannot prioritize Ike Howard or Matthew Savoie because we need to win hockey games right now. And at the same time, those same decision makers are telling you, we believe in Stuart Skinner. He will figure it out. Trust us. Those two ideas are pretty incongruent with each other as far as philosophy. Now, if you want to rule with an iron fist and say, we're letting guys figure it out, that means Savoie and Howard need real chances to do what they're good at. Throwing Howard and Savoie on the fourth line for 9 to 12 minutes a game isn't giving either guy an opportunity to get better at what they need to be an impactful NHL player. And I get it. I like Stuart Skinner, the guy. I feel bad he is in this position because he was not ready for this. The Oilers going to him when they did 3 years ago now, because Jack Campbell was so terrible out of the gate, was not the plan. Stuart Skinner needed time. Goalies don't come up until they're 24 or 25. They need 200-300 games at the developmental level, whether that's the AHL or Europe professional leagues, before we kind of know what they are. We know their capacity. And right now, it seems like Stuart Skinner is a victim to his own success, somebody who was a little bit better than expected, earlier than expected, and messed up his timeline. It put the team in a weird position because they desperately needed a goalie, and he can, on occasion, be an effective goalie. And knowing how hard it is to get one, the Oilers are extremely reticent to move on from him. They are extremely skeptical of just changing one uninspiring goalie out for another. I wanted Alex Lyon. I would have gave you Alexander Georgiev as a dart throw, a flyer. I'd entertain a trade for Pekka Luukkonen or Devin Levy. I would entertain maybe trying to talk Marc-Andre Fleury out of retirement. All of those were reasonable ideas over the course of the summer. Maybe Marc-Andre Fleury only wants to play 20 games down the backstretch. Sure. Is Marc-Andre Fleury at 40 going to give the Oilers Stanley Cup caliber goaltending? Almost certainly not. He's better than what they have, but the bar is as low as it gets right now. The goaltending is sinking this team, and I have no real way to know if it's ever going to get back on the tracks. Logic would tell you they will not be an .860 save percentage team all year. But at the same time, would it shock you if they were below .870, .880 all year? Not really. I know how bad it can be. And I know vibes, especially when it comes to a goalie, snowball. They sink really fast, and it becomes impossible to build them back up. And then the other question, what are they going to get from Ike Howard and Matthew Savoie? These are two guys they talked up all summer. Savoie started the year with Draisaitl. He was on the power play, he was on the penalty kill, and his minutes have started to bleed in the wrong direction. Ike Howard, somebody who got traded from Tampa Bay on the premise that he was going to play in the NHL this year. He did not want to go back to the AHL. Very much looks like he would be better served being in the AHL, because getting the 10, 11 minutes per night he's getting with other players who aren't dynamic in a role that isn't conducive to offense is not maximizing what he's good at. And ultimately, if you traded for the guy, why aren't you going to use him how he needs to be used? I wouldn't say I'm worried as far as the playoffs go, but I think the next week and a half, 2 weeks are going to tell you a lot about this group, because once Zach Hyman comes back, the excuses start to dissipate a little bit more, and the attention will turn to the goaltending, because at that point, I expect the offense to start working a little bit better. And if the offense is working and the defense is working, but they're still losing, that becomes a goalie issue. That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day, part of the journey of making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. I'll talk to you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.